We've always been told that history is written by the victors, but what happens when the victors are just ghosts? What if some secrets aren't buried in books or archives, but out in the permafrost, literally frozen into the marrow of human bone? For over a century, the Franklin expedition has been the ultimate maritime ghost story. We know it disappeared in 1845 into the white void of the Northwest Passage. We have seen the grainy photos of the skeletal remains and heard the chilling whispers of survival cannibalism. But for a long time, those deaths were anonymous, just tragic numbers on a tally sheet of Imperial failure. Today, that anonymity is shattering. We're going to look at how modern DNA technology just performed a forensic autopsy on British pride. We'll explore the terrifying psychological threshold where civilization evaporates into primal desperation, and finally, we will uncover why it took nearly 2 centuries for the full, grim reality of this tragedy to move from taboo whisper to public record. To understand how we got here, you have to imagine the sheer scale of Victorian ambition. In 1845, Sir John Franklin set out with 2 state-of-the-art vessels, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror. These weren't just ships, they were floating fortresses of technology meant to carve a path to the impenetrable north. They were carrying tons of supplies, high-quality food, and the weight of the British Empire's prestige. If they succeeded, it would be a triumph of science over nature. But as the ice closed in like a vice, the civilized world began to shrink until it was only as large as the deck of their ships. When the ships became prisoners of the ice, the narrative shifted from exploration to endurance, and eventually, it shifted into something much darker. Archaeologists have found pot polish on the bone's microscopic smoothing caused by boiling meat in metal pots. It's one thing to read about cannibalism in a history book. It's another to see the physical evidence that your ancestors were literally consuming each other to stay alive for 1 more hour of shivering consciousness. But here's where it gets personal and deeply unsettling. We aren't just talking about anonymous crewmen anymore. Recent DNA analysis has identified one of the primary victims as Captain James Fitzjames. Fitzjames wasn't some low-ranking sailor who might have been forced into a desperate act by a mob. He was a high-ranking officer, a man of status, a pillar of the Victorian social order. The fact that his body shows signs of being consumed means that in those final months, the hierarchy didn't matter. Rank, medals, and gentlemanly conduct evaporated like steam in the Arctic air. How did we find him? This is where science meets detective work. Researchers began cross-referencing DNA from living descendants with skeletal remains found on King William Island in the Adelaide Peninsula. It's like trying to solve a 175-year-old cold case using invisible threads of biological code. They weren't just looking for a body, they were searching for the story behind the bones. When a match finally clicked, when those modern strands matched the ancient calcium, the reality hit like a physical blow. Imagine being a descendant today and receiving a call from a scientist saying, "We found your ancestor." And then the second part of that phone call, and he was eaten by his own men. It turns our understanding of history from a dry academic subject into a visceral horror movie. It forces us to ask the question that keeps historians up at night. At what point does survival become something unrecognizable? When did they decide who was human enough to live and who was just calories? There's also the matter of why we didn't know this for so long. You might think there was a secret file hidden in a vault, but the truth is often more subtle and arguably more cynical. Historical erasure. The British Admiralty had to manage the public perception of this failure. If they admitted that their noble explorers turned into cannibals, it wasn't just a tragedy, it was a catastrophic loss of face for the Empire. It suggested that even our most civilized structures are only 1 layer of ice away from collapsing into primal chaos. The truth remained largely obscured not just by secret files, but by the crushing weight of social taboo and a lack of definitive evidence for over a century. They let the silence do the work for them, framing it as a mysterious disappearance, a heroic failure of navigation, rather than what it actually was, a systematic breakdown of human psychology under extreme duress. The DNA results are essentially pulling threads out of that sweater of silence. Every new match we find is another piece of evidence that our ancestors weren't just lost. They were trapped in a pressure cooker of fear and starvation, where the rules of 1845 simply ceased to exist. And here's something I want you to think about for a second, and maybe drop a comment on what you find more haunting. Is it the fact that they did this? Or is it how easily we can pretend it didn't happen until science forces our hand? We like to believe civilization is a permanent state of being. We think the rules are baked into our DNA, that we're fundamentally different from those men on King William Island. But these bones suggest otherwise. They suggest that civilization isn't an inherent trait. It's a fragile agreement we make with each other, an agreement that can be revoked very quickly when the temperature drops low enough and the food runs out. The Admiralty's management of this narrative wasn't just about protecting their reputation, it was about protecting our self-image. If we admit how quickly they fell, what does that say about us? We see the DNA results as new information, but in reality it's just old truth finally catching up to our modern tools. It's a forensic autopsy on what happens when the veneer of society is stripped away by the environment. Fitzjames was a man of status, and his end was a tragedy that would have been unthinkable in London tea rooms. But out there, in the white silence, he wasn't a captain or an officer anymore. He was just fuel for another day's survival. Isn't that wild? That we can spend nearly 2 centuries pretending something didn't happen, only to have a few base pairs of genetic code tell us the truth in one afternoon. It reminds us that history isn't just what happened, it's what we are willing to remember and what we choose to leave out in the cold.